The night air pressed heavily over Interstate I-95. A thin mist covered the roadway, as if the world had chosen to sink into silence. It was 3:14 a.m. when Michael Carter, a taxi driver with more than 10 years behind the wheel, drove forward, his eyes fixed on the headlights devouring the darkness. The road was completely empty. Not a single taillight ahead, not a single oncoming car. Only the low hum of the engine and the faint glow of the dashboard clock counting seconds that felt heavier than usual. Nights like this were supposed to pass quickly, melting into one another. But this one clung to the air, dense and unmoving. Then, at the edge of the mist, something shifted. At first, it looked like a shadow torn loose from the fog, a shape near the shoulder. Michael's foot eased off the accelerator, eyes narrowing. People did not walk this stretch of I-95 at this hour. Not without reason. Not without fear. As the car drew closer, the shape sharpened into a man. He was barefoot. His feet touched the cold asphalt as if it did not bite. A long white robe fell to his ankles, stirring softly in the wind. Dark hair rested on his shoulders, unmoved by the chill, and his stride was unhurried, steady, purposeful, like someone who knew exactly where he was going, even if the road led nowhere. Michael's instincts screamed to keep driving. Hospitals, shelters, danger. Every possibility flashed through his mind. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. The mist thickened, swallowing the man's outline again, and for a split second, Michael thought he had imagined it. Then the figure turned. He looked directly toward the windshield. There was no panic in his face, no urgency, only a calm so complete it felt out of place on a highway built for speed and noise. He lifted his head slightly and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The car slowed without conscious thought. Hazard lights blinked red against the fog. The engine idled. The silence grew heavier than before, as if the night itself were holding its breath. The back door opened. The man stepped inside and closed it gently, settling into the seat as though he had been expected. The air in the car changed. Not colder, not warmer, just different. The radio cut out in a burst of static and went quiet. "Thank you for stopping," the man said. His voice was low, steady, and warm, carrying a weight that had nothing to do with volume. Michael adjusted the rearview mirror, catching the man's reflection. There was no threat there, no urgency, only a presence that filled the space without pressing against it. Michael swallowed. "You're not exactly safe walking out here," he muttered, eyes returning to the road. "Where are you headed?" The man folded his hands calmly in his lap. "Wherever you're going," he replied. The words hung in the air, unsettling and strangely reassuring at the same time. Michael's chest tightened. He told himself to drive. Just drive. This was another passenger. Another night. Yet something deep within him knew the truth before his mind could catch up. This was no ordinary ride, and whatever had just stepped into the back seat of that car had not come by accident. Michael Carter had learned how to survive by keeping his life in motion. From the outside, he looked like thousands of other late-night drivers, scattered across America's highways mid-50s, shoulders slightly hunched, hands permanently marked by years of work. His Uber profile showed a polite smile taken years ago, before the lines around his eyes deepened, before sleep became something borrowed in short, restless stretches. He drove nights because nights asked fewer questions. During the day, the world expected explanations. Why he lived alone, why he no longer spoke about family, why he never stayed anywhere too long. At night, passengers only asked for destinations, airports, hospitals, apartments with porch lights left on. Nobody asked how he was doing, and Michael was grateful for that. The car was an aging Honda with a faint rattle in the dashboard and a heater that worked only when it felt like it. The seat sagged slightly on the left side, shaped by thousands of hours behind the wheel. Michael had learned to lean just right to keep the ache in his lower back from becoming unbearable. It was a posture built from habit, not comfort. He had once been a different man. Years ago, Michael owned a small auto repair shop outside Harrisburg. Nothing fancy, just a concrete floor stained with oil, a battered radio always playing classic country, and customers who trusted him because he fixed things honestly. He used to go home smelling like grease and metal, tired in a good way. Back then, tired meant earned. Now, tired meant empty. Since the shop closed, since the bills swallowed what little savings he had left, The road became his routine. One ride blurred into the next. He knew which gas stations stayed open all night, which exits to avoid after midnight, which streets held more silence than trouble. Driving kept his hands busy and his thoughts distracted, at least for a while. Home was a small apartment with white walls and a flickering kitchen light. Too quiet, too still. Michael avoided it when he could. When he couldn't, he sat at the table with a cigarette, staring at nothing, letting memories rise and fall like waves he refused to swim in. Faith used to live somewhere in his life, too. There was a time he went to church without thinking about it. A time prayers came easily, spoken without bargaining or bitterness. That time felt like it belonged to someone else now. Loss had a way of hollowing out belief, leaving behind questions with no interest in answers. So Michael drove, not because he believed tomorrow would be better, but because moving forward was easier than stopping. Each mile was a small delay. Each passenger, a temporary distraction. He didn't dream anymore. He didn't plan. He measured life in shifts and gas receipts and the soft click of doors opening and closing behind him. To Michael, this night was supposed to be no different. Another empty highway, another forgotten hour, another drive meant only to get him through until morning. He had no idea that, at 3:14 a.m., the road had already decided otherwise. The silence inside the car stretched longer than Michael expected. The man in the back seat did not shift, did not fidget, did not glance at the phone or the window the way most passengers did. He sat upright, hands resting calmly in his lap, as if the motion of the car belonged to him as much as the road itself. The faint scent of night air followed him in, clean and unfamiliar, cutting through the stale mix of gasoline and old upholstery. Michael cleared his throat, eyes fixed on the fog ahead. "So, where am I taking you?" The question was routine, automatic. He asked it dozens of times every night. The answer did not come right away. The man looked out through the side window, watching the mist slide past like slow-moving water. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, unhurried, carrying a quiet certainty that didn't ask for permission. "Wherever you're going." The words landed softly, but they did not fade. Michael frowned. He had misheard people before. Drunks, half-asleep riders, passengers lost in their own thoughts. But this was different. "I need an address," he said, trying to keep his tone neutral. "Somewhere I can put in the GPS." The man turned slightly, just enough for his reflection to appear in the rearview mirror. There was no confusion in his eyes, no hesitation, only calm. "You're already on the road you need," he replied. Michael felt his grip tighten around the steering wheel. A faint, humorless laugh escaped him. "That's not really how this works," he said. "I'm just a driver." The man smiled, not wide, not dramatic, just enough to soften the air between them. "And yet, you've carried many people farther than you realize." The radio crackled suddenly, then went silent again, as if it had decided not to interrupt. The dashboard lights hummed faintly. Outside, the highway continued to stretch empty and unbroken, the lane markings disappearing into the fog. Michael didn't like this feeling. He had picked up plenty of strange passengers over the years. People who talked too much, people who said nothing at all, but none who spoke like this. None who answered simple questions with words that felt heavier than they should have been. "You don't sound lost," Michael said cautiously. The man shook his head. "I'm not." There was something unsettling about that confidence. Most people he picked up were running towards something or away from it. This man seemed to be doing neither. He wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't afraid of the hour, the cold, or the emptiness of the road. Michael glanced at the empty passenger app on his phone. No active request, no destination blinking on the screen. Technically, he should have stopped the ride right there. Pulled over. Asked the man to step out. Instead, the car kept moving. For several miles, neither of them spoke. The tires whispered against the wet asphalt. The fog thickened, pressing closer to the windshield. Michael became acutely aware of his own breathing, of the steady rhythm of the engine, of the strange weight filling the space behind him. It felt less like he was driving someone somewhere, and more like he was being allowed to continue. Somewhere deep inside, beneath habit and caution, a quiet thought stirred one Michael had not entertained in years. What if this night wasn't about where the road led, but about why he was still on it at all? Michael tried to shake off the unease by doing what he always did when a ride turned awkward. He asked a simple question. "So," he said, keeping his eyes on the road, What should I call you? For a moment, the only sound was the steady rush of tires against wet asphalt. The fog pressed closer to the windshield, swallowing the beam of the headlights as fast as it appeared. The man in the back seat did not rush his answer. He seemed to consider it, not with doubt, but with patience. Then he spoke. My name is Jesus Christ. The words settled into the car like a sudden drop in temperature. Michael's jaw tightened. A short, nervous chuckle escaped him, the kind people use when they want to convince themselves they're not unsettled. That's a strong name, he muttered. You don't hear it much up here. Jesus smiled softly, as if he had heard that reaction many times before. My mother used to say, Michael added quickly, filling the silence, that carrying that name meant you were never really alone. He hadn't planned to say it. The words surfaced on their own, pulled from somewhere deep and old. Your mother was right, Jesus replied. Michael blinked. The steering wheel felt suddenly slick under his palms. He did not remember mentioning his mother. Not her sayings, not anything about his family. He replayed the last few minutes in his head, searching for the moment he might have let it slip. There was none. He adjusted the rearview mirror again, needing to be sure the man was really there. The reflection met his eyes, calm, steady, untroubled. No sign of mockery, no hint of a trick. That's funny, Michael said carefully. I don't think I told you about her. Jesus tilted his head slightly. You didn't need to. The dashboard clock ticked forward, glowing pale green. 3 to 17 a.m. Michael swallowed hard. He told himself this was nothing. A coincidence. A stranger fishing for a reaction. Yet something in his chest tightened. Not with fear exactly, but with recognition, like hearing a song he hadn't realized he missed. People joke about that name all the time, Michael said, his voice firmer now, defensive. Some use it to shock, some hide behind it. Jesus did not react. He did not correct him. He simply listened. What matters, he said quietly, is not the name, but whether you hear what follows it. The car drifted slightly in its lane before Michael corrected it. He exhaled slowly, forcing his shoulders to relax. He had driven intoxicated passengers, angry ones, delusional ones. He had handled them all. This should have been no different. And yet it was. The air inside the car felt heavier now, as if the night had leaned in closer. The silence between them was no longer empty. It pressed, waiting. Michael felt an odd sensation at the base of his neck, a chill that crept upward despite the heater humming faintly. He glanced at the road, then back at the mirror. Jesus sat exactly as before, hands folded, posture relaxed, like a man with nowhere else to be and no need to prove anything. There was no drama in IM, no performance, just a presence that refused to be ignored. Michael had picked up this passenger, expecting another forgettable ride. Instead, with a single name spoken aloud, something inside him had shifted subtly, unmistakably, as if a door he had sealed long ago had just been touched from the other side. And deep down, though he did not yet want to admit it, Michael knew this conversation was no longer something he could simply drive away from. The road straightened, stretching into a long, pale corridor of fog, and Michael focused on it as if concentration alone could steady his thoughts. The name still echoed in his mind, refusing to settle, refusing to fade. He told himself not to engage, not to invite more of whatever this was. That was when the man in the back seat spoke again. You're exhausted, he said calmly. Michael's shoulders stiffened. Yeah, he replied without thinking. That comes with the job. Jesus did not answer right away. The pause felt deliberate, like the space between heartbeats. Not that kind of tired, he said. Not the kind sleep fixes. Michael's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. The fog thickened again, blurring the edges of the road. He forced a breath through his nose. You don't know anything about me, he said. Everyone's tired. Jesus leaned forward slightly, not invading the space, just enough for his voice to feel closer. You're tired of carrying what you believe can't be changed. The words landed with unsettling precision. Michael swallowed, his jaw clenched. For a brief moment, irritation flared sharp, defensive. Look, he said, keeping his tone firm. I don't know what kind of game this is, but I don't appreciate strangers digging around in my head. Jesus shook his head gently. I'm not digging, he replied. I'm listening. The car drifted a fraction toward the shoulder before Michael corrected it. His heart had begun to pound. Not fast, but heavy, each beat echoing in his chest. He had heard therapists speak like this, preachers too, men who offered answers wrapped in soft language, but none of them had ever sounded like this. "And what exactly do you think you're hearing?" Michael asked. Jesus turned his gaze toward the window, watching the fog slide past. "A man who wakes up every day believing he deserves the weight he carries. A man who thinks motion is the same as healing." Michael laughed, short and bitter. "You got that from 5 minutes in the back seat?" "I got it from the silence you don't notice anymore," Jesus said. That struck harder than Michael expected. The heater hummed. The dashboard clock glowed. Outside, the highway remained empty, indifferent to the tension building inside the car. Michael felt heat rise in his chest, a familiar pressure he had learned to ignore over the years. "You don't know what I've lived," he muttered. "No," Jesus replied softly, "but I know what you've been running from." Michael's breath caught. He stared straight ahead, eyes burning, not with tears, but with the effort of holding something back. Memories pressed against the edges of his thoughts. A kitchen once filled with laughter, a voice he hadn't heard in years, words left unsaid because saying them felt too dangerous. "Everyone's got regrets," Michael said, more quietly now. "Yes," Jesus agreed, "but not everyone builds a life around punishing themselves for them." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Michael did not respond. He couldn't. His chest felt tight, as if the night itself had reached inside and touched something raw. He told himself to change the subject, to end the ride, to pull over and let the man out. Instead, the car kept moving forward, headlights carving a narrow path through the fog, and for the first time in years, Michael felt something he hadn't prepared for. The strange, unsettling sense that someone saw the weight he carried and was not afraid of it. The words did not accuse, yet they opened a door Michael had kept locked for years. The road ahead faded as his mind drifted backward, pulled by a force he did not invite. The fog outside the windshield gave way to another scene entirely. One filled with the smell of motor oil and old coffee, the clang of tools, the low murmur of a radio playing songs that once made the days feel shorter. There had been a time when Michael Carter fixed things. His auto shop sat just outside Harrisburg, modest and worn, but honest. The concrete floor was stained beyond repair, the walls cluttered with calendars and handwritten notes from customers who trusted him. He opened the garage door every morning before sunrise and closed it well after dark. Hands blackened, back sore, but satisfied. Work gave him purpose. It gave him a reason to come home tired in a way that felt earned. And at home, there had been Emily. She filled the house with sound laughter in the kitchen, music drifting from the radio while she cooked, the quiet hum of contentment that wrapped around the evenings. Michael did not talk much back then. He didn't need to. Life felt stable, solid, like something that would always be there if he just kept moving forward, until the day it wasn't. The memory came without warning. A Sunday afternoon, Emily in the kitchen, humming softly, flour dusting the counter. Michael had promised to be home early. One last job pulled him back to the shop. Just an hour, he told himself. It could wait, but he didn't. By the time he returned, red and blue lights painted the street outside their home. Neighbors stood in clusters, speaking in hushed voices. Emily was already gone. A sudden stroke, the doctor said. No pain, no warning, no chance to say goodbye. Michael had stood there, numb, listening to words that made no sense. The kitchen was still warm, the meal unfinished. Her voice, forever caught in the space between what was said and what never would be. After that, time moved strangely. The house became quiet in a way that pressed against the walls. Emily's mug stayed on the shelf. Her jacket remained by the door. Michael stopped noticing how often he stared at nothing. Their son, Daniel, drifted further away with each passing month, anger replacing conversation, silence filling the spaces where comfort should have lived. Michael didn't know how to grieve without breaking. So he worked, then worked more. And when the shop began to fail under the weight of bills and exhaustion, he let it go piece by piece. Selling the tools felt like giving away parts of himself. Eventually, all that remained was a car and a life that felt smaller than before. Faith slipped away quietly, without ceremony. He stopped praying, stopped asking questions. It felt easier to believe nothing was listening. As the memories tightened around him, Michael's jaw set. He hadn't spoken these things aloud in years. No one had asked him to. No one had seen the pattern, the way guilt shaped his days, the way silence became punishment. The car continued forward steady and unbroken. And in the stillness of the highway, with the past rising uninvited from the dark, Michael realized something he had never admitted before. He wasn't just driving to escape the night. He was driving to outrun the moment his life changed and never truly returned. The fog thinned just enough for the highway lines to reappear, pale and trembling beneath the headlights. Michael welcomed the distraction, but it did not last. The silence behind him shifted, no longer passive, no longer waiting. Jesus spoke again quietly, without urgency. "You weren't supposed to be at the shop that day." Michael's breath stopped. His foot pressed down harder on the accelerator before he realized it. The engine responded with a low growl, the sound echoing too loudly in the sealed cabin. He stared straight ahead, refusing to look at the mirror. "That's not something you say to people," he muttered. Jesus did not raise his voice. He did not push. He simply continued. "She was in the kitchen," he said, "cooking dinner. You told her you'd be home early." The words fell into the car like glass. Michael's hands began to tremble. His jaw tightened until it ached. He had never told anyone that detail. Not the promise. Not the smell of food still in the air when he came home. Not the way the house felt frozen in the exact moment he had chosen not to be there. "Stop," Michael said, his voice cracking despite himself. "You don't know what you're talking about." Jesus leaned forward just enough for his presence to feel unavoidable. "You believe her death was the punishment for leaving," he said. "Not because it's true, but because it feels fair." The road blurred. Michael slammed the brakes. The car lurched violently before skidding onto the shoulder. Hazard lights flashed red against the mist. He sat there, chest heaving, hands gripping the wheel like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "How do you know that?" he demanded, finally turning around. "Who told you?" Jesus met his eyes in the mirror. There was no judgment there. No accusation. Only recognition. "I know because you replay that moment every night," he said. "You think if you suffer long enough, it will balance the loss." Michael opened his mouth to argue, but no words came. His throat burned. The truth pressed in from all sides, undeniable and suffocating. "She was waiting," Jesus continued gently. "Not for perfection. For you." Something inside Michael collapsed. He shoved the car door open and stumbled out into the cold, bracing himself against the hood. The night air cut into his lungs. He bent forward, gasping, eyes squeezed shut as memories crashed over Emily's voice, the half-smile when he left, the way she said his name like she trusted he would return. "I should have been there," he whispered to no one. To everyone. "Yes," Jesus said softly from behind him, "and that truth has been eating you alive." Michael straightened slowly, wiping his face with the back of his sleeve. His hands shook, not from the cold, but from the weight of finally being seen. "You think this is justice," Jesus continued, "but it's not repentance. It's prison." Michael leaned back against the car, staring up at the starless sky. "Then what am I supposed to do?" he asked, his voice barely holding together. Jesus did not answer immediately. When he did, his words were quiet, but they landed with unmistakable force. "You're here because you don't have to carry it alone anymore," said Jesus Christ. The night did not change. The fog did not lift. But something inside Michael did. For the first time since that Sunday long ago, the guilt he carried had a name, and it had been spoken aloud. The car eased back onto the highway, moving slower now, as if both man and machine needed time to recover from what had just been exposed. Michael kept his eyes forward, jaw tight, the words still echoing in his chest. He expected silence accusation, maybe, but what came instead was something entirely different. "You think your life stopped that day," Jesus said quietly, "but you kept giving life without realizing it." Michael let out a short breath. "I don't know what you mean." Jesus did not look at Imam. He spoke as if reading from a book written long ago, one Michael had forgotten he helped write. "Do you remember a woman on Broad Street, 5 winters back?" he asked. "She waved you down in the rain. She was shaking. She had a child burning with fever." Michael's fingers twitched on the wheel. A memory surfaced, headlights splintering through rain. A young mother clutching a small body wrapped in a thin blanket. She hadn't asked for the fare. She had only said, "Please." He had driven faster than he should have, ignored red lights, left her at the hospital doors without waiting for payment. "I remember," Michael said reluctantly. I didn't do anything special. The child lived, Jesus replied. He's in middle school now. He wants to be a doctor. Michael's throat tightened. That's not possible. I never knew what happened. That doesn't mean it didn't matter. The road hummed beneath them. The fog thinned, revealing long stretches of asphalt lit by the steady sweep of headlights. Michael's mind raced, searching for logic, for coincidence. Jesus continued. A girl sat crying outside a subway station one night. 16 years old, afraid to go home, afraid to go anywhere. Michael's grip loosened. She got into your car, Jesus said. You didn't ask questions. You didn't lecture. You drove. Before she left, you handed her a chocolate bar and said she didn't deserve what was hurting her. Michael stared ahead, breathing shallowly. He had forgotten the chocolate, forgotten the words, forgotten the girl's face. She didn't go back, Jesus said. She finished school. She helps others heal now. Michael shook his head. I was just driving. Yes, Jesus said gently. And sometimes that's enough. The memories came faster now. An elderly man talking to himself all the way to a nursing home. Michael listening without interrupting, waving the fare when they arrived. A woman with bruised arms sitting silently in the back seat, him offering a tissue and saying nothing else. A drunk man crying about a son who wouldn't call anymore. Michael staying quiet when laughter would have been easier. You gave people your presence, Jesus said. You call it nothing because no one applauded. Michael swallowed hard. I've made more mistakes than I've helped people. You count failures because you think they define you, said Jesus Christ. But love doesn't keep score the way guilt does. The words settled into Michael slowly, like warmth spreading through cold hands. His chest ached, not with regret this time, but with something unfamiliar. You believed your life was only a series of losses, Jesus continued. But you never saw the ripples you left behind. Michael's eyes burned. He blinked, once, twice, refusing to let tears blur the road. No one ever told me, he whispered. Jesus turned slightly, his reflection steady in the mirror. Because the good you do quietly is rarely announced. The car continued forward, cutting through the night. And for the first time in years, Michael felt the weight he carried shift, not gone, not erased, but lighter, as if something unseen had begun to lift it from his shoulders. The highway sign emerged from the fog like a quiet command. Next exit, 1 mile. Michael noticed it without thinking, the way a driver does after years on the road. His instinct was to pass it. He always passed exits at this hour. They led to places he didn't need. Towns closed for the night, memories better left untouched. Then the man in the back seat spoke. Take the next exit. The words were not loud. They weren't urgent. But they landed with a certainty that made Michael's chest tighten. He glanced at the mirror. That's not on my route. It is now, Jesus replied. Michael shook his head. I don't even know where it goes. Jesus looked ahead, as if he could already see what waited beyond the darkness. You do, he said. You just don't want to. The blinker ticked on by accident. Or maybe not. Michael hadn't consciously moved his hand, yet there it was, the soft clicking sound filling the car like a countdown. His heart began to pound, slow but heavy. That exit leads back towards Cedar Ridge, Michael said, more to himself than to the passenger. I haven't been there in years. I know, said Jesus Christ. Cedar Ridge. The name alone carried weight. A small town tucked just far enough off the interstate to be forgotten. The place where everything had last felt whole, where a life he no longer recognized had quietly ended. Michael swallowed. There's nothing there for me. Jesus did not contradict him. He simply said, there's something there you've been avoiding. The exit sign rushed closer. Michael's mind filled with reasons to keep going, fatigue, logic, fear. He told himself this was absurd. A stranger giving directions. A conversation gone too far. He could keep driving, drop this man at the next gas station, return to the safety of routine. But his foot eased off the accelerator. The car slowed. The fog thinned just enough for the off-ramp to reveal itself, curving away from the highway like a quiet invitation or a warning. Michael felt the familiar resistance rise in his chest, the instinct to stay moving, to avoid stopping long enough to feel. What happens if I turn? He asked. Jesus answered without hesitation. You stop running. The words struck deeper than Michael expected. The blinker clicked faster now. His hands trembled on the wheel. He thought of the years spent circling pain instead of facing it, of roads taken only to delay, never to arrive, of how easy it had been to mistake motion for progress. At the last possible moment, Michael turned the wheel. The car left the interstate. The roar of passing traffic faded behind them, replaced by a quieter road lined with trees and dim streetlights. The air felt different here, still heavy, but softer somehow, as if the night itself had changed tone. Michael exhaled, long and unsteady. For the first time since picking up this passenger, the destination no longer mattered. What mattered was the choice he had just made. The highway stretched on without him, and somewhere in the darkness beyond that exit, the life Michael had been avoiding, waited patient, unresolved, and finally within reach. The road narrowed as it wound through Cedar Ridge, the town sleeping under pale streetlights and early morning fog. Storefronts stood dark, flags hanging still. Time paused in that quiet hour before dawn. Michael slowed instinctively, as if noise itself would be an intrusion here. Jesus guided him with a nod toward a small side street. At the end of it stood the church. It wasn't grand. White siding weathered by years of sun and rain. A modest steeple rising without ceremony. The parking lot was empty, save for fallen leaves skittering across the pavement. The building looked almost forgotten. Doors closed, lights off, no sign of life. Michael killed the engine. The sudden silence felt enormous. "I haven't been inside a church in years," Michael said quietly, more statement than confession. Jesus opened the door and stepped out, barefoot on the cold ground. "You don't have to believe anything tonight," he said. "Just speak." The church door was unlocked. Inside, the air was cool and still, carrying the faint scent of old wood and dust. Moonlight filtered through narrow windows, casting long shadows across empty pews. No choir, no candles, no witnesses, just space. Michael stood near the entrance, hands shoved into his jacket pockets, unsure where to look. The altar sat ahead, simple and unadorned. He felt exposed in the quiet, as if the walls themselves were listening. "This feels wrong," he muttered, talking to nothing. Jesus walked to a pew and sat, folding his hands, leaving the center aisle open. "Then talk to the silence," he said. "It's been waiting." Michael took a step forward, then another. His feet felt heavy, like each movement required permission. He stopped halfway down the aisle and stared at the altar, throat tight. "I don't even know what to say," he whispered. "Say what you never did," Jesus replied. The words unlocked something. Michael's shoulders sagged. His breath hitched once, then again. He pressed a hand to his chest as if trying to steady his heart. "I was angry," he said, voice breaking the stillness. "After she died, I was angry at everything. At God, at myself, at her, for leaving." The confession echoed softly, unchallenged. "I told myself I didn't care anymore," he continued. "That faith was just something people used to make sense of loss. But the truth is, I was afraid. Afraid to speak, afraid to remember, afraid that if I opened my mouth, everything I buried would come rushing back." He swallowed hard. "I never said goodbye," Michael said. "Never said I was sorry. Never said I loved her enough." His knees buckled. He sat heavily in the pew, elbows on his thighs, head bowed. Words poured out now, disordered, raw, unfiltered. Apology spoken too late. Anger finally named. Love admitted without defense. Jesus remained silent, not distant, present. Minutes passed, or hours. Time seemed to loosen its grip inside that empty church. When Michael finally fell quiet, his chest felt hollowed out. Not empty, but lighter. He lifted his head slowly. Jesus stood at the end of the aisle, looking at him with steady calm. "You didn't pray," he said gently. "You told the truth." Michael wiped his face with trembling hands. "Is that enough?" "For tonight," said Jesus Christ. "It's everything." The church remained empty, but Michael was no longer alone. Dawn crept in quietly, thinning the shadows inside the church until the pews and walls returned to their ordinary shapes. The stillness remained, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt finished. Michael rose slowly from the pew, joints stiff, eyes swollen, chest sore in the way muscles ache after carrying too much for too long. He turned instinctively toward the aisle. Jesus was gone. No footsteps, no open door, no sound of departure. One moment there had been presence, steady, grounding, and the next, only space. Michael's breath caught as he scanned the room, heart racing with a sudden, childish fear of being left behind. Jesus? He called softly. The name echoed back from bare walls and settled into silence. He stepped outside into the pale morning light. The parking lot lay empty. No figure on the road, no white robe disappearing between trees. The town stirred faintly awake, unaware that anything extraordinary had passed through. For a moment, doubt rushed in. Had exhaustion finally cracked something in his mind? Had grief dressed itself in comfort and illusion? Michael rubbed his face hard, trying to wake fully, trying to anchor himself in reason. That was when he felt it. In the pocket of his jacket, something unfamiliar pressed against his fingers. He frowned and pulled it out. A small, folded card. Not a receipt, not a church pamphlet. Just a single piece of heavy paper, worn at the edges, as if it had already traveled far before reaching him. He unfolded it carefully. 4 words were written in neat, steady ink. You are not alone. Michael stared at the message, pulse thudding in his ears. No signature, no explanation. He turned the card over. Blank. The weight of it settled slowly. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, but undeniable. The kind of certainty that doesn't shout, that doesn't need proof. He looked back at the church doors. They were closed now, as they had been before. Ordinary, unchanged. And yet everything felt different. Michael sank onto the steps, card clenched in his hand. The memories of the night replayed, not as fragments, but as a single, unbroken thread. The highway, the fog, the names spoken aloud, the truths no one else had ever named, the silence that listened. This wasn't the kind of miracle he had imagined as a boy. No lights, no thunder, no voice from the sky. Just a presence that arrived when he could no longer carry himself alone, and left behind enough to prove it had been real. Michael breathed out slowly, the tension easing from his shoulders. Tears gathered again, but these were quieter, less desperate. He slipped the card back into his pocket, close to his chest, not as evidence, but as a reminder. Whatever had happened that night, one truth remained. He was different now. And as the sun rose fully over Cedar Ridge, Michael understood that some encounters are not meant to stay, they are meant to change the way you walk after they're gone. Far down the road, unseen and unnamed, Jesus Christ no longer needed to be present. The sign had been left behind, and it was enough. Morning traffic reclaimed the streets as if nothing unusual had happened. Michael's car merged back into the flow of the city, sunlight glinting off windshields, horns sounding in brief impatience. Office workers hurried along sidewalks. Coffee shops filled. Life continued at its usual pace. Yet inside the aging Honda, something had permanently shifted. Michael drove differently now. Not faster, not slower, just present. He no longer filled every silence with music or talk radio. Some rides passed in quiet, others in fragments of conversation that mattered more than he once believed possible. He listened, not as a habit, but as a choice. And people noticed. A young man climbed into the back seat one afternoon, eyes red, voice barely holding together. General Hospital, he said. My mom's in ICU. Michael nodded, eased into traffic, and said nothing else. When they arrived, the young man reached for his wallet. Michael lifted a hand gently. Just go be with her, he said. The man froze, then swallowed hard. Thank you, he whispered, before disappearing through the sliding doors. Another night, an elderly woman with trembling hands sat in the back seat clutching a paper bag. She talked the entire ride about a husband gone 20 years, about loneliness that settled hardest after sunset. Michael didn't interrupt. When they reached her apartment, she smiled like someone seen after a long time. You made me feel less alone, she said. Michael drove on. He kept the small card in his jacket pocket, not as proof, not as superstition, but as a compass. When fatigue returned, he touched it. When guilt resurfaced, he remembered the words spoken in an empty church. When doubt whispered that none of this mattered, he paid attention anyway. Presence became his quiet discipline. At stoplights, he noticed people. At crosswalks, he waited. At night, he prayed, not with polished words, but with honesty. Some at times it was only a breath and a sentence. Help me be here. The miracle did not announce itself. It multiplied. Michael began checking in on neighbors he had once avoided. He answered calls he used to ignore. He wrote letters he never sent, then learned to send them anyway. Healing arrived in pieces, uneven and real, the kind that grows through repetition rather than spectacle. He never saw the barefoot man again. But on certain nights, when the fog rolled in low and the highway stretched empty, Michael felt that familiar calm in the car, as if someone unseen still rode along. Not to speak, not to direct, just to be. That was the legacy. Not a story about a driver who met a miracle on the road, but about a man who became one, quietly, by choosing to be present for others when it counted most. And that, it turned out, was how Jesus Christ still walked the world, through ordinary hands, ordinary choices, and hearts finally willing to stay. This story reminds us of a truth many people discover only later in life. The greatest miracles are rarely loud. They arrive quietly, through presence, patience, and compassion. Michael did not receive wealth, power, or a life free of pain. What he received was something deeper. The courage to stop running from guilt, to forgive himself, and to simply be there for others. As the years pass, many older hearts carry unspoken regrets, unanswered questions, and silent grief. This story gently teaches that it is never too late to heal. Listening, showing kindness, and offering presence can change lives, even when we believe our own life no longer matters. That is how Jesus Christ still works in the world today, through ordinary people who choose love over indifference. If this message touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and share this video with someone who may need encouragement. Stay with us to continue watching more stories of hope, faith, and quiet miracles.